welcome to the Bible for worship at St. Paul Lutheran Church on this 16th Sunday after Pentecost, when our gospel reading is written in the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 16, verses 19 through 31. Jesus said, "There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. He called out, 'Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames.' But Abraham said, 'Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us, a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us.' He said, 'Then I beg you, Father, to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come into this place of torment.' Abraham replied, 'They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them.' He said, 'No, Father Abraham, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent.' He said to him, 'If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced even if someone rises from the dead.'" The Gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This story of Lazarus and the rich man, or the rich man and Lazarus, is a narrative, a story that in many ways really embodies what Luke has already said in recording the Sermon on the Plain by Jesus in chapter 6. Matthew and Luke share a lot of the material in that sermon. Matthew has it placed on a mountain, while Luke says that Jesus came down to a level place and began to speak, but they both show Jesus starting that sermon with the Beatitudes. And in chapter 6, verse 20 and 24, Luke says, "Blessed are you poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven." And then, "Woe to you that are rich, for you have your consolation." The rich man and the poor man, exactly the way that Luke introduces the two characters in this story. A rich man who feasted sumptuously, and at his door lay a poor man. Now, if we keep track of how Luke represents characters throughout the gospel, we'll know that to be rich in Luke's gospel is not an easy thing. It's a real challenge. The rich are those we might think of as coupon clippers, those who have their stocks and bonds, their investments, and who essentially live off other people's labor. So there is a clear signal here that with a rich man and with Lazarus, there's going to be some kind of reversal that takes place, as the Beatitude suggests. And yet we have to be careful about completely demonizing the rich in our reading of this, because Luke does not completely demonize the rich. Just 3 chapters on, near the end of this central travel section of the gospel, Luke will tell us that Jesus said to Zacchaeus, a rich man, "Today salvation has come to this house, for here also is a child of Abraham." The question seems not to be purely about wealth, about being rich, but rather about whether one lives as a rich person, as a child of Abraham. And indeed, here, this rich man has the opportunity to have a conversation with Abraham. You see, the circumstances of the rich man's richness or Lazarus's poverty are of no particular consequence to Luke. We hear nothing about them except the simple description, which makes it plain how large a social chasm already exists between them. But Luke moves through all of that quite quickly in the first few verses and gets to the point where both have died. Lazarus has been taken by the angels to be at Abraham's side, and the rich man has been buried, where he finds himself in Hades, tormented and in agony. It's after this happens that Luke's story really starts. Or should I say Luke's stories, because there really are 2 in this dialogue between the rich man and Father Abraham, as he refers to the comforting presence that Lazarus finds in heaven. The first dialogue, in which the rich man asks for Lazarus to just bring some water and cool my tongue, I'm in agony, has Abraham responding that there is a great chasm between you and us. In life before you died, you were comfortable and Lazarus suffered. Now, after death, Lazarus is comforted and you are suffering. That's just the way it is, Abraham seems to be saying. And across the chasm that has been fixed, there can be no traffic, no transit. For Luke's audience, this is not so much a description of heaven and hell as we might think, or a final determination about where rich people and poor people end up, though Luke has his biases and tends to favor the poor in that regard, not exclusively. Rather, for Luke's audience, and that includes us, doesn't it? This is a message that says, after you die, there's no possibility to respond to what God has done and called you to do. That doesn't mean there isn't plenty of opportunity still now for you to be able, for us to be able to respond to what we hear from God. But beware, because the time is now, Luke says. It's not in some afterlife, in some later place, in some world to come, where it might suddenly dawn on us, oh, that's what God meant. And in a sense, that's not even what the rich man comes to realize, because he simply asks Abraham to send Lazarus as a kind of messenger boy with water to cool his tongue. It's not as though he yet recognizes just exactly who Lazarus is. In the second story, the second exchange, after Abraham has rebuffed the request for Lazarus to bring some water to cool my tongue, The rich man says, well, then at least if he can't come here, send him back to earth. Send him back to the life we knew. I have 5 brothers in my home. Let him go back and warn them about this. And Abraham says, they have Moses and the prophets. They have the scriptures. They have Israel's lifestyle law. And those who interpreted it and applied it and helped to expound it for the people and encourage them. And the rich man says, well, yes, but if somebody comes back from the dead, then they'll really believe and repent. They'll change their ways in a way that I did not and now cannot. And Abraham says, no. If they couldn't read and understand Moses and the prophets for what they are saying, then even someone rising from the dead won't convince them of anything. Again, we think about Luke's audience. This is not a theological treatise. This is rather an appeal, an address to an audience to hear what it is that God, through Jesus, is calling them to do. And what is it? It is to hear the law and the prophets, to read Moses, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible with all of that lifestyle, and to hear the prophets who caution against falling away from it. And in that, to understand what it is that God was doing in Jesus. This is not new for Luke's audience or for the world. The old interprets the new and makes sense of it. And what was it that Moses and the prophets called Israel to live? Well, Micah 6:8 summarizes it nicely. To do justice with an emphasis on mercy, just like God. To do justice with an emphasis on mercy. Yes, justice is crucial, but justice all by itself leads only to death. Who was it that said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth all by itself only leads to a blind and toothless world? Justice alone does not suffice. After all, in one sense, Jesus even got justice under Roman law. It's true that he was acclaimed as a rival king to Caesar. We in the Christian church believe that there is a kingship that rivals and even exceeds Caesar's, and we acknowledge Jesus Christ as that king. That is sedition to Roman ears. So, in a sense, Jesus even got justice in a way, and it led to death. But the prophets and Moses say no, it's justice with an emphasis on mercy, together with our God, because that is how God has treated Israel all along. Rebellious Israel in the wilderness, and yet God did not throw them off. Defiant Israel moving into the land, and yet God did not kick them out. Idolatrous Israel in the land, even with God's temple, and yet God does not destroy them. Oh, they go into exile to learn their lesson, one might say, and even there they find God still with them, calling to them, waiting for them, urging them, and giving them the grace to return to their land and to return to God's ways. Justice said they go into exile. Mercy says they can always come back. Justice alone leads to death. Justice with mercy leads to life, even resurrected life, even life eternal alongside Abraham. It's about God's faithfulness. God's faithfulness not to a blind justice, but God's faithfulness to a people, to Israel as a people, to Lazarus as one of God's people, to us as God's people. God bless.